Sounds great.
All right, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I did put in the chat the toll-free number for the Contact North Technical Support Hotline. If anyone is having any technical difficulties, please feel free to reach out to our tech support provided to us today by Contact North. The closed captions are also enabled for today's session. So if you click on the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, you will have the opportunity to turn on your closed captions. We also have ASL interpretation today, thanks to Carolyn and Rebecca. Your facilitator for today is going to be Andrea Dickinson, and we are going to have the presentation by Jack Veitch. I believe, one more thing, the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be posted to the eChannel Pop-Up PD webpage. I will post the link in the chat in just a moment. And there will also be a very quick survey link in there as well. I'll pop the survey link in a few times throughout our session, just so if you have to leave early, you'll already have the link ready to go. We highly encourage and absolutely love the feedback that we receive from the survey. So please take a few minutes to fill that out. It's always very, very helpful. Okay, with that being said, Andrea, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and welcome everyone to today's Pop-Up PD webinar on dealing with change, the impact of prolonged stress, and what we can do to be healthy. I'm Andrea Dickinson, Executive Director with Tri-County Literacy Network out of Chatham, and it's my pleasure to kick things off with a little introduction today. And Jack, if you can advance the slide to the next slide. And today we have our presenter, Jack Veitch, with us. Jack presented in our region before, and he was very well received, so I'm thrilled that he can be here to provide a provincial presentation. Jack is manager of the Community Engagement and Education with the Canadian Mental Health Association, Haliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge branch. Jack has worked with his local CMHA branch for over 16 years in a variety of roles, including housing, community support, intensive case management, and forensic case management. In his current role, Jack teaches a variety of certificate courses, including Safe Talk, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, Mental Health Works, Mental Health First Aid, Living Life to the Full, and is a certified psychological health and safety in the workplace advisor. Jack was part of the team that helped create the Ontario Hockey League CMHA Ontario Talk Today program, in which he currently works as a Peterborough Pete's mental health coach. Next slide. And for the statement of recognition, while we meet today on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to recognize, respect, and acknowledge the importance of the lands we occupy and from which we benefit. Today, let's reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Let's remind ourselves that wherever we are, we live on the ancestral and unceded territory of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. And for a little bit of information about the Pop-Up PD for literacy educators, it is a free webinar series developed by Ontario's LBS regional networks and the provincial support organizations for literacy. It supports LBS practitioners with presentations on topics important to them. We do like to survey the field, find out what you're interested in. We also look at your evaluations when we're putting together topics. and we have been providing webinars since 2015, 2016. All webinar presentations, recording links, and transcripts are at Pop-Up PD Resources for LBS educators. So if you do Google that, that should pop up for you. Webinar topic ideas are welcome at echannel@contactnorth.ca. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback from the evaluations and also look at those for ideas. So without further ado, it's my pleasure now to turn it over to Jack Veitch.
Andrea, thank you so much. Thank you
You're
for
welcome,
having
Jack.
me here today. Thank you to everyone that's here today, that's along for the ride on our American Thanksgiving, our American neighbors to the south enjoying Thanksgiving. Hopefully, maybe you've even got a little piece of turkey or something you're snacking on while you're watching this session. And I'm going to do my best again for our interpretation services. I mentioned I tend to go at a quick pace. I'm going to breathe deep. I'm going to keep at a good pace, and hopefully everyone's going to have a good time. So I'm excited to be here to jump in. So you know, again, who I am. Well, why am I here this afternoon? Well, I'm hopeful we can gain a better understanding of stress and stress responses. What is stress? How does it impact us? And then really, I want to key on the difference between what we call acute stress and chronic stress. What happens when a stressor remains? We're going to promote coping strategies for our mental health and wellness, bring light to different things we can do to be well. Again, how do we recognize that chronic stress? And what are these simple techniques each and every one of us can utilize to be well and to stay well? And last, we're going to end by designing our own wellness strategies. So how do I actually implement self-care in my day-to-day life? What are some things I can do to be well? What are some questions I can ask myself? What's some homework I can have upon leaving this session here today? So we can tell you about stress, and I talked last year, I believe, about the impact of stress and what it is. What we've seen as we've moved through COVID is, again, some not necessarily surprising, but nonetheless a bit unsettling and bit of data and information. We're seeing again that in 2022, approximately 35% of Canadians aged 15 or older reported high levels of perceived stress most of the time, up 11% from 2018. Nearly 2/3 of Canadians aged 15 and older reported experiencing elevated levels of stress most or all of the time. 76% of employed Canadians reported symptoms of psychological distress during the pandemic. Again, we have seen and we are seeing some of the highest rates of generalized anxiety, of stress that we have seen in 10 to 15 years. And again, we talk about how this pandemic has impacted the mental health of many people are experiencing that high level stress and anxiety. 82% of Canadian millennials express concern over the potential long-term effects that the pandemic would have on their mental health and wellness. I remember as we were moving through, and I like to think of that we're moving out of COVID right now, but I remember sort of as we were moving through COVID, I remember talking at length about this idea that as we exit this sort of physical health crisis, we're going to be transitioning into a real mental health crisis, aren't we? So many have been struggling silently. And as this pandemic sort of slows, hopefully, you can see more and more people reaching out. And we're hearing it not just in your region or mine, but all across North America, where more and more people are struggling with this idea of chronic or prolonged stress. So maybe we should identify, well, what the heck actually is chronic stress? Well, chronic stress refers to that prolonged period of psychological arousal or heightened response to external stimuli or internal thoughts. It can be the result of sort of one traumatic incident prolonged over time, or ones that last for longer periods of time, things like incarceration, unemployment, relationship problems, history of substance use, or just poor environmental conditions. I always say, what better example of a chronic stressor than that global pandemic? The stressor that didn't leave, it didn't come and go, it remained. We'll key on that in the slide as well. Again, we see prolonged low intensity stressors, such as being married or providing care to someone who's really struggling with physical or mental health concern, has been identified as particularly injurious when we talk about chronic stressors. And again, when subjected to that chronic stress, people often utilize what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms, or really, in simpler terms, really unhealthy ways of regulating those emotions and feelings. We'll key on some of those here today when we talk about substance and substance use. So again, if you remember me speaking from years past, you know I'm a visual learner. I like visual cues, visual aids to help me along. So you can see on your screen here what we call normal stress resiliency. So this again, all of our brains just working properly. So I always think of different examples. Let's think of one. Let's imagine it's a beautiful sunny Friday. None of this gray, rainy stuff. I don't know what it's like where you're sitting right now, but it's a pretty cold gray day here. So let's imagine it's a beautiful, sunny June Friday at lunch. And you've been working hard all week, so hard, in fact, that right before you take your lunch, right before you take your break, your boss calls you over the PA and says, "Hey, you know what? Everybody that can hear my voice, you've done such great work, done such a great job. I'm sending everybody here home today with a full day's pay. Half day work, full day pay. What a great day that's going to be. Let's just imagine it will happen." So we're all going to go home. We're going to celebrate. In fact, we're going to find a place to eat to celebrate this beautiful sunny day. We're going to walk down to our favorite spot. What the heck? We're going to treat ourselves to the Golden Arches, a big M. I won't say the name. You know what I'm talking about. We're going to treat ourselves to a fancy spot. So we're excited for this lunch. It's beautiful. It's sunny. I'm walking down the road. I can smell those fries in the distance as I'm crossing the street to get to that restaurant, that nameless restaurant. Somebody driving way too fast, way too recklessly. They don't see me crossing the road. They slam on their brakes. Again, I think we've all been in a scenario like this before. We're crossing the street, someone's not paying attention. We got to sort of perk up. So again, in this scenario, we have a stressor that enters, a stimuli, this vehicle that's coming towards us. As a result, our system will enter into peak arousal, elevated hyper alertness, hypertension, elevated state. We use this elevated state for safety, for survival. And again, I use that elevation to step back, to jump out of the way, to dodge a car, maybe to kick a headlight on my way by. I use that fight or flight response for safety or survival with time, action, and support. My system self-regulates. I catch my breath. I walk over to the sidewalk. I think, gosh, I'm so glad that's over with. And I carry on with my day. Again, this normal, natural response. We need this elevated state, this stressor response. But with a chronic stressor, with persistent, with prolonged, with chronic stress, it's not as if the stressor enters and I can dodge around it. The stressor presents and I can just resolve it or deal with it. It's as if the stressor remains. And what better example of a chronic or persistent stressor than that global pandemic? I couldn't just run past it. I couldn't just kick its headlight out. I couldn't just ignore it. That stressor remained. And as a result of that stressor remaining, for many of us, our systems remained in that peak arousal, that hyper alertness, that hypertension, that elevated state. Again, our system stayed in that prolonged elevated state. And I will tell you quite simply, our system isn't meant to be there for prolonged periods of time. We're not meant to be in that peak arousal to make good, long-term, well thought out decisions. We're there for fast decisions. And when we get stuck there, you can start to see long-term health results. And we see it in a lot of different areas. We see physical or behavioral changes. We see things like fatigue, changes in appetite or eating patterns, changes in sleep patterns, restlessness, somatic complaints, headache, digestive issues, dizziness, nausea, headache. What better example than the real
Sorry,
connection?
Jack, from the interpreter. I'm just going to ask you to slow down when you're reading the points on the slide. The interpreter's a little behind. I'm
Sure.
at restlessness. Thank you.
Restlessness and somatic complaints. So we talk again about things like headache, digestive issues, nausea or dizziness, the increase in blood pressure. Again, what better example of a sort of connection, the correlation between mental and physical health than with things like stress or generalized anxiety? How much of this is a physical manifestation, a physical presentation of psychological injury? Again, we talk about, I physically feel tired. I physically feel nauseous. I'm physically exhausted. We actually see a compromise in immune system as a real sort of side effect of that chronic or prolonged stress. So we actually have research that shows that the period of time following an exam period, that period of time, students are at highest risk to become physically ill again. And think of it like this, let's imagine we have a student, perhaps one more studious than myself. And this student isn't just thinking about, preparing for this exam the morning of the exam. Maybe they're studying days, weeks, months before that exam takes place. And again, every day they're waking up and they're thinking about, okay, I've got to prep, I got to read, I got to research, I got to review, I got to come back to my notes and check. Day upon day, hour after hour, that chronic stress remains. And then that exam happens. That exam takes place. And as I step backwards, my system here, it doesn't just sort of slowly self-regulate, it crashes. Because again, my systems remained in this peak arousal for so long, it just gives out. And we actually see a compromise in immune system where people are much more likely to become physically ill. Other pieces as well, we could see changes in libido or changes in drug or alcohol use, which we'll talk about shortly as well. Other emotional symptoms, feelings of being helpless or overwhelmed, inadequate, vulnerable, agitated, restless, sad, even irritable. You know, I've stolen this from other courses that I teach. Sometimes we can invite help in really uninviting ways, can't we? That irritability, that frustration, that anger. You know, I know for me, I like to think of myself as relatively even keel, pretty relaxed from time to time. My wife might say different, but I think of myself as pretty relaxed. But I know if I'm short tempered, if I'm quick to respond, that to me is an indication maybe I'm more stressed about something than I really thought I was. That anger or irritability, an inability to cope, an increase in mood swings, decreasing in motivation, crying more easily and frequently, isolating or withdrawing from others. And again, that cycle that perpetuates. I'm not doing well because I'm isolated. And because I'm not doing well, I don't want to go see anybody. So I isolate even further. And that cycle that just self perpetuates. Again, changes in communication patterns and other relationship dynamics that become strained or stressed. Mental symptoms we might see, again, confusion, a difficulty making decisions or problem solving, memory blanks, having those ambiguous, uncertain feelings, questioning my own personal safety, a difficulty concentrating, paying attention or focusing on tasks. I find like my mind wanders or I can't stay close or focused on one idea. Focusing maybe on more negative thoughts, racing or intrusive thoughts, or just flat out just worrying a lot, finding myself in that constant state of worry. My system stuck in an elevated state. So again, what is that inevitable result when we think about chronic stress for prolonged periods of time? Well, gosh, we always get to that term of burnout, don't we? And again, we think about burnout. It was a term that kind of surfaced in the 1960s with work done by a psychologist named Herbert Freudenberger. And he did research that really started to draw connection to show how patients, or I guess research participants would be the term here, were impacted by being exposed to prolonged and chronic stress. And again, what was the sort of key themes that we saw? And again, tell me if this is relatable. That cynicism, fatigue, exhaustion, and just detachment. And again, it was often called that staff member attrition or those staff member attrition reactions. But really, it really just burns down to the idea of burnout. I'll tell you all this. Pre-COVID, sessions on burnout, sessions like this, I almost exclusively reserved for healthcare professionals, social service workers, mental health workers, healthcare, nurses, doctors. But I'll tell you this, as we've moved through COVID, this has become one of the most requested sessions that I do because more and more people can relate to the idea of that exhaustion, that burnout. Man, I just feel depleted. I feel drained. I feel like I have nothing left to give, like it doesn't matter. That sort of mental fatigue that has impacted so many. And again, we see this in workplaces across a lot of different industry, and we see burnout with employees specifically when they expect just too much of themselves. They start to feel like their work isn't good enough, what they're doing isn't good enough. They feel inadequate or incompetent. They just feel unappreciated for their work, or even just have unreasonable demands placed upon them. I think about unreasonable demands. And again, I'm sorry I keep using COVID as an example, but it's just such a good example with this topic and the subject matter. Again, the unrealistic sort of request that came, well, I've got to do my job in the same way, but I don't have the same tools, I don't have the same resources, I don't have the same connections to my peer or staff. Again, those pressures that are changing. There we go. So again, we think about that stress that impacts so many. And it's, again, things we didn't have control over. That stress, again, I can't control what's happening. I can't control the health restrictions. I can't control international incident. And my system just runs out of fuel. It runs out of steam. And what we've seen, again, through research from the 1960s, quite frankly, right on through, is that people often turn to those what we call maladaptive, or a really simple word, unhealthy coping strategies when looking to manage those feelings of chronic stress. And what is one of those key pieces? Well, substance. And again, I'll tell you this, we classify drug essentially in three main categories. We classify substance on how it impacts our central nervous system. And there's essentially three main impacts to that nervous system. There's depressant, there's stimulant, and there's hallucinogenic effects to that nervous system. Depressant, don't think depressed or sad necessarily. Think instead about depressing the functionality of that nervous system, of slowing down its operation. Again, much like I'm trying to do right now, slowing down how the system is working. Introduce a depressant in large quantities to a brain, it slows the speed of that brain down. Stimulant will do much the opposite. It will excite or speed up that brain, make it work much, much faster. Hallucinogen, don't just think of hallucinate necessarily. Hallucinogens distort feeling, affect, perception. They change the way that I can perceive things around me. And if we talk about what we're seeing probably the most when we talk about people dealing with that chronic stress and anxiety, we saw this pre-COVID, we're seeing it right through as we carry on out of COVID. It's really high rates of alcohol consumption all across North America. So really there's four main types of alcohol: methyl, ethyl, propyl, and butyl. Ethyl alcohol is the type used in production of alcoholic beverage, really what most people think of when they think of that quote unquote alcohol. Although other types of alcohol can be consumed, they can be really dangerous, even in small doses. Sometimes if consumed can even result in blindness, that major disruption to brain activity. And we can find alcohol in a variety of substances. You can find alcohol in like beverages, as we've talked about, in hand sanitizers, medicines, antifreeze. You can see people utilizing that substance in a variety of ways. So again, how does alcohol impact the brain? I'm sure you've all heard of different ways anecdotally, but essentially it's depressing the functionality of that brain. It's inhibiting brain functioning. It's slowing down the firing of neurons. As a result, it impacts your fine motor skills, your speech and coordination. I don't see as well. I don't walk as well. Don't even speak as clearly because my brain has been sort of slowed down dramatically. It impairs our recall and our memory. It's the only substance, in fact, that has clear sort of ties to use and aggression. So people talk about substance use and violence. We talk about probably the best, the clearest connection we have is with alcohol. Alcohol and violence are very clearly connected. And alcohol actually as well inhibits sleep functionality. It actually keeps your system from being able to enter into that same deep REM stage sleep cycle required. It's why you may see, or may have seen in years past, a person that uses alcohol in excess and passes out or loses consciousness. When they sort of wake up the next morning, they're still not very rested. They're pretty tired. They're exhausted because their brain was not able to enter that same deep REM stage sleep cycle. Again, the real detriment that lack of sleep has on your wellness, tied with substance use, can be a super negative when managing those feelings of stress. So I've got a short little video here that's going to continue to elaborate on how alcohol can impact our brain. So for this one, to avoid distraction, I'll stop my camera. I've made sure my sound is shared. I'm going to mute my mic and play our short video on alcohol in our body.
We explain what alcohol does to your body. This is Michael. He enjoys going out and drinking at the weekend, sometimes a bit more than he should. He's worried that it might be affecting his health. What exactly is alcohol doing to him? Michael knows that alcohol is used to describe beverages containing ethanol. Depending on their amount and volume percentage, some drinks are stronger than others. The intoxicating effects of alcohol are caused by ethanol entering the bloodstream faster than the liver can break it down, thus changing the signals sent from the brain to other parts of the body. This causes the euphoric and relaxed experience of being drunk, but it also has its risks. Lower doses of alcohol cause Michael to lose his sense of balance and ability to make decisions. He might even be sick because alcohol can irritate the stomach and have a negative effect on the inner ear. Higher doses of alcohol are far more dangerous, particularly if consumed regularly, because areas of the brain responsible for breathing, heart rate, and temperature control begin to shut down. Long-term problems can include addiction, liver disease, high blood pressure, and cancer. Alcohol's effect upon the central nervous system can lead to coma and even death. To minimize damage to health and society, each country has its own laws on alcohol, including the amount Michael can drink before driving a vehicle on the road. They may also have guidelines for how much alcohol is safe to drink each day. Michael is glad that he now knows the dangers of alcohol and how it affects his body. So, if you consume alcohol, drink responsibly.
Jack, I don't know if you're frozen, but we don't hear you. It looks like Jack just logged out. We'll give him a minute or two to jump back in. There we are.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sorry, folks, we still seem to be waiting for Jack to return. Okay, I have a message here saying he's trying to reboot. My system won't let me back in the call, trying to reboot.
Just to make it easier for him too, Andrea, I also resent the link to the Zoom session. So hopefully it's a quick reboot. The joys of technology.
Okay, so this is another example of stress, I take it.
I also noticed a weird little glitch in Zoom. Every time Jack joins, it's his picture with my name. So I don't know what happened there. That's a new one for me to try and figure out when we're done.
Oh my.
I see a lot of Black Friday talk in the chat. I was actually going to ask if anyone is in the United States today and wish them a happy Thanksgiving, but I didn't get the chance to right at the beginning.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Jack.
Yes.
Ah! I had to reboot my computer. I apologize, everybody. Hopefully, you guys have talked about fun things. How much fun
Well,
you're
we
having.
also talked about how this is an example of stress.
Ah, it's actually it was a case scenario. It was like a live demonstration of how to panic during a presentation. And I think I did pretty well. So I'm glad I'm back. We will be cutting any other video from the content here today. So I'm going to jump back in. I appreciate your patience, everybody, for helping me through. So hopefully, I hope you saw the video on alcohol. Now, alcohol impacts the system.
Yes, we
And
did.
fantastic. And I'll tell you again, other substance use we see as well that can be even more detrimental to mental health and wellness is opiate and opiate use. And when we talk about opiates, things like codeine, fentanyl, hydrocodone, oxycodone, oxycontin, more. These drugs, again, for what they're designed to do, will work exactly as described. They will manage, they will monitor end stage pain. But again, when we talk about really unhealthy coping mechanisms for managing those stressors of those feelings of anxiety, using that depressant, again, we talk about really high addictive qualities and the real serious health repercussions that can happen as a result of extended or prolonged opiate use. Even sort of less damaging, I'll say less damaging potentially, substances like caffeine. We talk about caffeine or stimulant use can be very common when people are experiencing stress or anxiety. And I've worked with a lot of people who would say things to me like, Jack, man, when I get really stressed, I'd like to have a warm drink to help me mellow out. And they'll drink 1, 2, 3, 5, a pot of coffee a day. At that point, we're not slowing our brain down, we are ramping it up. So Health Canada is going to actually recommend no more than 450 milligrams of caffeine per day and no caffeine after 3 p.m. Now, I know I'm going to lose the audience with that one here. They're going to start dropping off the call. But again, we're trying to distance that caffeine intake from our sleep, trying to limit the amount of stimulant we're giving our brain to make sure we're getting that good, deep REM cycle sleep like we talked about throughout that video. Even things like cannabis use in the last few years has climbed in usage numbers pretty, I wouldn't say dramatically, but moderately. We've seen it increase, probably a little more than 1 in 5 Canadians regularly using cannabis. And again, as a recreational tool, people can live their life. But what I would suggest, again, if this was my means of regulating those feelings of stress or anxiety, that might be a problematic concern. Again, what's really happening when we use cannabis? Well, I won't play this video, but I will encourage you to watch the video as I send the slide deck after the talk, because I don't want to get booted from this session here again. But it's a really cool video. And essentially what it tells you is that it's dissipating, or it's disabling neurons in your brain. It's sort of increasing the refractory period from neuron to neuron. It's keeping thoughts fixated on one idea at a time. And with prolonged or excessive use, again, it's changing cannabinoid receptors in your brain. That is science. Being mindful to really engage in Canada's low-risk cannabis use. So there's 2 links on the screen here. I do want to encourage people to check it, just to be mindful, to recognize how much of these substances might I use. Could they have detriment on my health and wellness, physical or mental health? So Canada has their low-risk alcohol guidelines, and they historically reflected things like 15 drinks per week for women with no more, or for men, sorry, with no more than 3 per day, 10 drinks per week for women with no more than 2 per day. And I'll tell you, those recommendations are being adapted by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And there's research that came from the University of Victoria that's actually recommended that Canadians, men and women, should not drink any more than 2 drinks per week. Anything more than 2 drinks per week shows increased risk of physical or mental health impact for wellness. So again, I'm going to lose audience with that one, but being mindful of how much I'm intaking. Our low-risk cannabis guidelines as well from Health Canada gives recommendations on lower risk use. There's about 10 recommendations there, and I would encourage people to just check them out, to become familiar. And really, it does just sort of reflect moderation and being mindful in usage. Again, what are those effects of cannabis? Well, those feelings of sense of relaxation, lost my notes there, feelings of euphoria, heightened sense of perception, altering or perception of time, an increase in appetite, an impact on our short-term memory, slowing our reaction time. It can reduce our coordination, and in some cases, create those feelings of anxiety, distrust, or even panic. It actually is, well, too, super dangerous. I just have to throw this in. It is very dangerous to see cannabis-induced driving, or cannabis-impaired driving, I should say. Again, there's many that have this mindset that cannabis-impaired driving is somehow safer than alcohol-impaired driving. And I just really want to discourage that sort of line of thinking. And I'll tell you this, we have research that shows impacts of alcohol-related drivers, impacts of cannabis-impaired drivers. For alcohol-impaired drivers, what do we see? We see key themes. We find that those drivers drive faster, they drive more recklessly, they often greatly overestimate their own abilities. I can make that turn, I can cut that bend, I can make it around that person. Again, they overestimate what they're able to do and how they're able to do it. Cannabis-impaired drivers, we actually see the exact opposite. They will drive much slower. They will give more space. They will brake sooner for an upcoming sign or stop sign. So sometimes people hear that and think, oh, okay, they've greatly underestimated their own ability. They're driving much safer to do so. Again, what isn't sort of explicitly said, but what I will say is that, again, the cannabis impaired driver is far less ready to respond to the unexpected external stimuli. So the example I'll always use, yes, if I can see the stop sign coming, I will stop in due time. But for the stop I need to make that I don't expect, like a child chasing a ball out into the street, I am less prepared to stop on time for that. My reaction time is reduced. My coordination is reduced. I can't respond in the same way to the unexpected. And it, again, can still be very dangerous to be that cannabis impaired driver. Just a bonus point I wanted to throw in to this session here. Again, I had a funny video. Enjoy it after. It'll be your homework to enjoy the videos towards the after. So we've talked about maybe what we shouldn't do in managing those feelings of chronic stress or chronic anxiety, and that substance can be detrimental long term. So what could be some really healthy coping strategies for our wellness? Well, I've got a list of things here: recognizing and accepting, taking stock, identifying and decreasing identified sources of stress, creating a self-care plan, and building in resiliency. Recognizing and accepting, hey, it's not a weakness, you're not alone, and you don't have to do it alone. As I've identified right off the top, if you're watching this here this afternoon and you're thinking, man, gosh, when I heard those behavioral symptoms or those psychological symptoms, those feelings, I identify with that. Again, you are not alone, and you don't have to do it alone. More people than ever in the last 2 or 3 years, from 10, 15 years prior, are experiencing these feelings of stress or anxiety. This is some of the most common stuff we're dealing with in the field right now. If you are struggling, if you are experiencing these symptoms, I really want to encourage you to reach out to eradicate that self-stigma that may exist with some. You know, I've done sessions, I'm sure I've done them with this group before. I think a couple of years ago, I talked about stigma and mental illness and that sort of peer-to-peer, person-to-person stigma that exists. Oh yeah, you know what, Joe, he lives with illness, he can't, he won't, he'll never, that outward stigma that acts as a barrier to care. And I'll tell you this, if you were to ask me personally, professionally, about that outward stigma, I would tell you pretty confidently, it's reduced in the last 10, 15 years, pretty significantly. You hear it far less than maybe 20 years ago, that idea that, oh, they have an illness, so they can't. Again, people are so much more apt to be encouraging and kind and help people direct towards care. I think what's still very real, what's still very present, is that self-stigma, that internalization of negative public attitude and suffering as a result. That idea of, hey, you know what? I just got to suck it up. I got to deal with it. Other people seem to be getting along just fine. Other people seem to have their lives sorted out. I'll just figure it out. I'll just deal with it. I'll figure it out and get it done. That self-stigma that impedes care. That self-stigma that keeps people from reaching out. That self-stigma that worsens symptoms because people don't get the help that they need. Again, if you take anything from today, I really hope it is to pull back the layer of potential self-stigma that may exist and encourage you to connect and reach out to somebody if you thought it appropriate. Another really cool activity we can do is what we call taking stock. And these statements here are from a PhD, Sheldon Cohen. And it's the perceived, how's he titled? Perceived stress scale, as he's identified. And these are all different questions you can ask yourself. Now, I'm not going to read through them all in detail here at this point, but I'm going to send these slides out. Andrew's going to send the recording out. I want people to take time this weekend, tonight, Friday night. Do it as a Friday night party with your friends. And I want you to ask these questions or read these statements to yourself and see how much maybe they resonate. Again, am I seeing impact on my physical comfort? Do I feel tight, sore, and muscle aches? Do I find myself getting sick more frequently? Do I find myself just feeling exhausted? Do I notice major fluctuations in my weight, my appetite? Taking the time to intentionally notice, to intentionally pay attention. How am I feeling? How am I doing? How long Have I felt this way? Again, I'm certain the people in this room spend much of their lives, if not their careers, worrying about others, helping others, supporting others. I want you to take just maybe this Friday night, this Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, to reflect back and take stock. How am I doing? How am I feeling? What's changed for me? We really want people as well to build resiliency. And the American Psychological Association, they define resilience, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family, relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace or financial stressors, the chronic stressors that exist for many. And if we find ourselves trying to build resilience, well, what can we do? How do we actually do that? Well, again, I have more questions, more homework. You're like, Jack, I came to the session not for homework. Well, I'm giving you a bunch. Again, I want you to ask yourself these questions. What are you doing for your self-care? What do you need to do every day to be well? What do you need to do in general to be well? And what are you not doing that you could start? And I think the biggest thing I hear a lot of times about self-care is this idea that, Jack, I hear it, I go to the seminars, I listen to people talk, but gosh, I am busy. I've got kids, I've got family and pets, responsibility. I don't have time to just take care of myself, to have the quote unquote bubble bath. I don't have time for that. I always give back to people. And I want you to pretend like I'm asking you as you listen to this right now, whoever you are, I'm asking you. I'll tell you, without meeting this room, without ever meeting you, I am certain that if you right now got a phone call to your desk where you're sitting from somebody you loved, somebody you cared about, and that person at the other end of that line said to you, hey, I'm in trouble. I really need your help right now. Can you come help me? I am so confident 100% of this room would say, you know what? Yeah, I can do it. I'm loving this talk with Jack, but I've got to do something more because I care about you enough. And you would figure out your work schedule, you'd figure out this session, you'd figure out whatever else you've got to do, and you'd go and you'd help that person that you love. Why do we not share or show that same kindness to ourselves? I really want you today to take 10 minutes in your schedule. It's Friday from 4:50 to 5 o'clock. Those are the 10 minutes I'm going to take just to focus on me, on my wellness. Maybe I'm not even doing bad. Maybe I'm not even struggling. Maybe things are going great. They're going swell. That's awesome. Let's continue to do things to help you to continue to do well, to do great, to exceed. I'll tell you this, in sort of mental health care in Canada, in a Western society, really across all of healthcare in a Western society, we really have this post-vention model of care. And what I mean by that is we have this notion that says, okay, let's wait for the problem to present itself, and then we'll work to fix the problem, which is one of the most ill-effective ways to manage an issue, isn't it? You know, we don't take care of our vehicles, of our cars in that way. You know, think of it like this. If I decided the best way to take care of the tires of my car, if I decided, hey, you know, the best time to change one of my tires would be, I'm going to wait. When one of my tires explodes, I will then know that's the right time for me to get a new tire. That'd be a very poor way for me to manage my vehicle, wouldn't it? So we don't do that. I don't wait till my tires explode. I rotate them with the seasons. I check on them regularly. I bring my car in to be serviced routinely. Again, why don't we do that same thing with our health and our mental, our physical health, checking in, routinely updating, doing things to help our system run well, give ourselves that premium fuel every now and then, get myself the fancy tires every now and then. Why don't I do something before I ever need it? Again, build this plan. Explore what resources exist for you. Do you know what resources exist in your community? Who would you reach out to if you were struggling? Is it someone in your family, circle of friends, cultural or spiritual group or church group? Do they know they're that person for you? Could they accept your call if you made it? Would you rather reach out to a local mental health agency? What programs do they offer? What is the phone number? Again, I really encourage you to think of these things now, today. Build this plan and put it in your pocket. I hope you never need it. But if you do, you can activate it instead of trying to design it. Take that time to actively prepare for your own wellness. And the last thing I'll encourage when we talk about our own wellness and managing stress is setting boundaries and setting limits. And again, we talk about having healthy boundaries and health limits. Well, what are healthy boundaries? Well, people with healthy boundaries are those that have a clear sense of themselves. They know their strengths and weaknesses, what they want, don't want, like, dislike, and they're okay with them. They have a reasonable understanding of their own capabilities and their limits. And people say, well, you know what? It can be really hard to set a limit or a boundary, especially with someone I love or that I care about. And there's a lot of reasons that can arise for a lot of people. I don't want to have conflict. I don't want to be seen as a failure. I don't want to be seen as doing things wrong. You know, I'm going to be disapproved. They're not going to think I'm a good employee or a good family member or a good sibling. They're going to think I just don't know how to do my job. I don't want to set those boundaries because I don't want to be seen in a negative light. I just don't want to hurt their feelings. Shoot, I'm just too embarrassed to say no. I'll feel dumb if I do. Again, so I just overexude. I overstretch. I continue. I remain in that chronic stressor. I don't take the time for my wellness. And inevitably, I hit that burnout. So what can I do to set some really clear, healthy boundaries? I've got 4 simple steps that I'm going to encourage people to do when setting boundaries, setting limits. Number 1, decide what you want. 2, be firm. 3, remember you're not responsible for the responses or actions of anybody else. And 4, it's a process. Be kind to yourself. Deciding what you want. I can never come into a room or do a training or with a group and say, okay, hey, here's your limits. Here's what your boundaries should be. Here's what you should and you shouldn't do. I don't have that right. But I encourage people to reflect back. Again, with all this homework I'm giving you, one more piece is to sit and think, okay, what are my limits? How far would I go for my coworker, for my neighbor, for my daughter, son, brother, sister, parent? I assure you, those boundaries and limits will shift and they will change from person to person, from situation to situation. That's okay. That's not good or bad. It simply is, and it exists. And I really encourage you to be mindful, to decide where are those limits. And what you've decided what those limits are going to be, being firm. I will always tell people this. The most effective boundaries are always 2 things. They are very, very clear. They are very, very consistent. Consistency and clarity is key when we talk about setting a boundary. Maybe I'll explain with a volunteer. So Andrea, can I call on you, my friend Andrea? Would you be able to help me out with something for a second?
Sure.
Andrea, I put you on the spot. I probably should have told you I was going to do this, but I knew you'd be able to. So Andrea,
I think you've done this before in our
I've done it before once or
presentations.
twice, put you on the spot. Andrea, are you in a room with walls right now?
Yes.
You sure are? All right. Well, Andrea, is there a wall perhaps maybe right behind you?
Yes.
I'd like you to do me a favor, Andrea. I'd like you to stand up. I'd like you to knock that wall over. Now, let's imagine you said to me, Jack, okay, I'll give it the old college try. I'll give it a shot. And you stood up, you walked back to that wall, and you tried to knock it over. You kicked, you shoved, you pushed, you kicked, you pushed, and the wall wouldn't budge. Andrea, eventually, are you going to quit trying to knock that wall over?
Yes.
Yeah. You're going to come back to the camera, come back on mic and say, Jack, I tried. The wall ain't moving. I don't know why you wanted me to knock it over. Now, Andrea, what if you went to that wall and you tried to knock it over? You're pushing and shoving and kicking, and the wall, it nudged a bit. It leaned a little. Would that be encouraging for you to continue to try?
It might, yes.
Yeah, it just might be think, oh my gosh, Jack just figured out that I'm strong enough to knock over this wall. I'm going to knock down this whole darn building. And inevitably, you're going to push it over. Imagine, everyone, imagine setting a boundary very much the same way. If I have someone try to knock it over, push it, move it, adjust it, when it doesn't budge, When it doesn't move, inevitably, that person will stop trying to knock it over. Every behavior serves a purpose. When it no longer serves that purpose, the behavior will inevitably change. However, if that person learns that, hey, when I yell real loud, when I get real mad, when I get really sad or upset, that wall, it starts to lean, it starts to teeter, and I can knock it over. Well, isn't that just so darn encouraging to keep on trying? Just like Andrea so kindly helped us demonstrate, having a consistent and clear wall. I know where that wall is, and I cannot move it, will be the most effective and strongest boundaries. And again, remembering, I'm never responsible for the actions of somebody else. Setting a limit or setting a boundary, especially a new limit or a new boundary with someone in your life, can often create a lot of different responses for maybe how I'm going to move that wall. I don't like that wall. I don't want that wall there. So maybe I'm going to get really mad, really sad, frustrated, defensive. That way that I'm going to try to move that wall. I can never control how someone responds to my comments, actions, or behaviors. I can only be responsible for my action. Remember, every behavior serves a purpose until it no longer does. Then the behavior inevitably changes. And again, just to be kind to yourself, this is a process. Maybe it doesn't go swimmingly the first time. Maybe someone knocked my wall over a bunch of times. That's okay. I can learn, I can grow, and I can figure out what worked and what didn't work. Be kind to yourself. Again, just like I've said throughout this session, show yourself the same kindness you'll be so quick to show everybody else. And we have different techniques again in communicating and connecting, and I'll send these out. One of my favorites is the win script. Again, try to set those limits, or set those boundaries. A simple way of expressing need. Hey, you know what? When I feel, I need or want. When you address me in that way, I feel hurt, disrespected. I need you to change the way that you talk to me. A direct, honest, appropriate way of asking that person to change their behavior. All right, so I'm moving towards close here. We're gonna have some Q&A towards the end, but I want to key on this idea of when do we seek help? So I'll tell you this, I met Andrea and the group here through COVID. And so much what I've done for the group has been over the computer, virtual here, with varying degrees of success with technology, that's demonstrated today. But again, being in front of a live audience again, which I do more often now, and I missed more than I thought I ever would. I think about times I've run sessions like this, and I've seen audiences in front of me. And I can see people in that crowd with a literal pen and paper. And I'm talking through things like illness or symptomology and how things can be disruptive. And I can see people with their pen and paper making literal check marks on that pad of paper. And it's almost as if they're saying, okay, once I get enough ticks, once I get enough check marks, then it will be the right time for me to reach out and connect with somebody. When's the right time to seek professional help? Anytime you want. I don't need to be at the point of high level disruption of serious mental illness to reach out and connect with someone for care. Even if I had the most mild to moderate disruption and I wanted to do something to improve that, I can. Whenever I am ready to reach out and connect with somebody, to work through things I might be experiencing, that to me is the perfect time. That said, when would I be a bit more assertive in directing people towards formalized care? Well, if I saw any of the following. I see it especially, when people are feeling overwhelmed, unable to cope, just their activities of daily living are impacted. I can't sleep, I can't eat, my relationships are strained, I can't return to a normal routine. I experience extreme feelings of helplessness or hopelessness. I'm experiencing thoughts of harming myself or others. Or again, as we've identified earlier, I find myself using substance in excess as a means of dealing with those feelings of stress or anxiety. If I saw those sort of key presenting factors, I would more assertively direct that person towards care. And what might care look like? Well, I've got a whole list of different resources here. Maybe it's your local CMHA. You can go to our national website, cmha.ca. I know it's be hard to sign, cmha.ca/findyourcmha. Free website. You can find your branch anywhere in the country. You could be your family doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, or psychotherapist, a leader in your faith community, family, friends. your EFAP, EAP provider. If you're fortunate enough to have an EAP provider through your employer, it can be super beneficial. Peer support groups, and as I've talked about in years past, the Bounce Back program, bouncebackontario.ca, free government-funded psychotherapy available to everybody across Ontario. And I'll tell you, expanded in August of 2020, thanks to Bell Canada, you can get Bounce Back anywhere in Canada. And I'll tell you this, for the 50, 60 people on the call, if you're having trouble finding a local resource, by all means, send me an email directly. I'd be more than happy to connect you with any of my colleagues across the country. So I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea for our last slide. Tech couldn't hold us back, Andrea. Our last slide.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, Jack. You always do a great job, and I love the examples that you give. There are lots of comments in the chat about the tire example. I think people were really relating to that. So thank you very much for your presentation. We certainly encourage people to complete the evaluation. And we thank people for joining us today. And I think you were going to open it up if people had some question and answer.
Yeah, we have more time because my videos wouldn't play.
Yeah.
So come on, we got Q&A.
Okay, we'll open up for Q&A.
While we wait for a question, I will thank our interpreter team. Thank you very much for your patience with me. I did my best to pace myself, but I know I move quick. Thank you very much.
There's lots of thank yous, Jack. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jack and team.
Amazing.
Thank you. Great information and reminders. Oh, it's going by so fast. I can't even read them all. A lot of thank yous. Oh, maybe there's a question in there.
I think
How
I
would
see.
you recommend talking about mental health with learners? Is that the one you saw too?
I did. Can I ask for clarification on the term learners? Like, is that just our audience here?
So the adult learners that come to the literacy and basic skills programs wanting to upgrade their skills, so they would be 19 and older generally.
19 and older. Any
Mhm.
other general specific information I should know, or just generally 19 older?
They usually, sorry, Andrea, I'll just jump in as my question. I might be able to help.
Oh, go ahead, Heather.
Just thinking in terms of the majority of learners that come to LBS programs have many challenges against them. They haven't done obviously well in the school system. So their skills levels are low. They may not have employment or good employment. They may not be ready for employment. They may be, in situations of poverty. So a lot going on. Many of them will already be like there will be addictions and all of that. And so so if they aren't getting supports already, or they're not accessing mental health aids, how would you recommend talking to them? Sometimes because they have a close relationship, they develop a good rapport with their literacy instructors. We might be the only ones that could introduce that to them. So
I think that's fantastic. And Heather, that's incredibly helpful. I appreciate that background. So I look at it like this. I think about venue. And I think about the venue you're describing, where these young men and women and individuals, I should say, are coming in to learn more and have maybe struggled. And you talk about a lot of the social determinants of health that are disadvantaging, perhaps many of them, increased risk of substance, increased mental health concern, increased poverty. These are all sort of pretty clear detriments to health and wellness. We know that. What I would encourage you to do first and foremost is something I imagine I hear in your question you already do. And that's look to create venue. Look to create a venue where people, students, feel like they can tell you, learners, I suppose is the language you use, feel like they can tell you what's going on. How's my mental health doing? Good or bad, great or terrible? best or worst. I'll always say this, try as you may, you can never control the mental health and wellness of another person, of your friends, of your kids, of your students, of your coworkers. But again, what you can control in some small way is a venue that in this home, in this work site, in this classroom, this is a safe place to talk about your mental health and wellness, good or great, best or worst, amazing, terrible. You can tell me what's going on. And when there's that sort of understanding that they can talk to you when they're ready, it will give you opportunity and afford you opportunity to provide direction towards care. So what would I encourage you to do? Simply let them know, hey, if you're not having a good day, you can talk to me about it. If you're struggling, you can talk to me about it. This door is open. I'm not going to shove you through it, but when you're ready to walk through it, I'll gladly walk through with you. Doing your best to continue to create a venue that I can hear in your question you're already working on building.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
So I see it. There's a hand, I think.
Yes. Bahista, do you have a question?
She's asking to be spotlit. She's deaf.
Stacy, are you able to spotlight?
I just enabled your webcam. You should be able to jump on webcam, and once you turn it on, I will spotlight you.
I believe I can see.
Yes. You used a really good example for your boundaries. And if someone is talking to me as their practitioner, I'm listening to them and I'm used to hearing from them. Maybe it's not the right time or they're telling too much and I'm not equipped to be able to help them. I've been doing this for 5 years and I have some friends who will tell me a lot. And when I suggest that they can't tell me anymore, they get upset because they say, that I've always listened to them. So I think it's important to establish barriers because I've come to a place where I feel like it's too late. I never had them in the first place and I can't put them in place now. So it's very difficult.
Oh, I think, again, thank you for that, Vahisa. And one, you've identified bang on setting new limits, how difficult that can really be, and how vigorously people can try to kick that wall over when it's new. And again, I think one of my favorite sentiments to share with people when I'm trying to set a limit like that is, I really want to help you, but there's limits in what I can do. The best way I can help you is by bringing you to someone that can. Again, it's not that I don't care, not that I don't care about you, but I want to help you in the best way by bringing you to someone that can, setting that limit. Again, I hear that one a lot.
Thank you for that
Okay.
question.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
And Jan has a question here. Are you aware of any agencies that are not waitlisted and offer free or very, very low cost mental health support counseling?
I would unfortunately have to defer to my colleagues in the region, specifically CMHA Lambton, Kent. However, send me a note. I'll be more than happy to explore throughout with my colleagues in the region.
Thank you for going above and beyond, Jack. We really appreciate that.
You guys are good to me.
Oh, and you got a thank you from Jan. Good questions.
Amazing.
Yes, and I liked your wall example too. I think that's a good visual for people to think about when they're talking about boundaries.
Awesome.
Are there any other questions? Really good questions so far. And lots of thank yous and enjoyed the session. I'm just looking to see if I missed anything. I think I caught them all.
Amazing. Well, I tell you what, Andrea, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the audience, the thoughtfulness, the questions, the whole team that makes this happen. So thank you for being so kind as to welcome me back. And I hope we can work together in the future.
You're welcome. And thank you, Jax. Wonderful to have you back. Another wonderful presentation. Thank you. And thank you,
Amazing.
everyone, for joining us today. Stacy, did you want to put the evaluation again for people?
Oh, did I want me to put that back up?
Oh, sure. I think Stacy has a link.
It's on the very last page.
Oh,
There you go, Andrea. I just posted it
excellent. Thank you.
Oh, it's in the chat.
chat. So it's clickable. Unfortunately, the Zoom links are not clickable on PowerPoint slides in Zoom. So Jack, I had also pasted a few links that you had shared on your slides in the chat as well. So they
Thank you.
will be clickable on the slides when we share them on the pop-up PD page on our website. Nothing else from me. I see people have started to log on. Jack, thank you again so much for the information. Andrea, you're such a wonderful host. You're so calm and it's so not stressful. So I think we did very well.
Excellent.
Carolyn, Rebecca, thank you so much for the ASL interpretation. And have a very, very good day, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you,
Thanks,
Stacy.
everybody.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone.